get started. International Trade and Finance. We're just going to concentrate on Chapter 21 on further reflection.
Yeah,
I decided that 22 and 23 weren't going to be as worth our while. But there's some exciting stuff in Chapter 21 about trade, about bookkeeping for trade, and what's the third thing? Trade, bookkeeping, and exchange rates. All right, how exchange rates affect trade, and how some of the concepts we've already discussed, like inflation and whatnot, relate to exchange rates. So, trade. Let's talk about trade before we talk about trading partners. Trade. Why might it be good for countries to trade with each other?
exchange goods that you couldn't otherwise get domestically.
Yeah, exchange stuff you couldn't get, and also somebody else may be able to make that product less expensively than you can. So everyone wins. It's the same concept of we want more people in this economy, providing more goods and services. More people we have, lower price, better quality, better standard of living. So that's great. We want to do trade. Who are some of our trading partners? So Europe is a big trading partner with the United States economy. Now China is a small-ish trading partner, about 12%. But we hear a lot about China because there's a trade deficit. We buy so much more of their stuff than we sell to them. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Why do we trade? It allows countries to consume goods exceeding their production possibilities. As Luke mentioned, other countries can produce things that we couldn't. Additionally, they could produce things at a lower price, a lower cost, and more for everyone. So how do we make those decisions? What we should produce? Well, it's that what can we do at the lowest cost, the most benefit for everyone type of calculation. But it's not even so much the lowest cost. It's what's the lowest cost relative to other things you could produce. Like a country may be able to produce various things at a low cost. But one of those things they can produce so much lower than everyone else, then that's the one that they should produce. And that concept is called producing the one in which you have the best comparative advantage. All right, so what should you produce? You should produce goods and services in which you have a comparative advantage, which is the ability of a country to produce goods at a lower opportunity cost than any other country. Do you remember opportunity cost from class 1, I believe? 1 or 2?
It's the cost of making the purchase or not.
Oh, okay, that's not inaccurate, but it's not exactly what I want.
What costs you to make or produce the item?
All right, so
a country that's abundant in fruit probably doesn't have to spend as much money to grow it and sell it. And
yeah. All right, you're on the right track. Absolutely, that's going to factor into comparative advantage. But the definition of opportunity cost is the opportunity I give up by producing what I produce. So if I'm going to produce steel, what opportunity do I give up? I give up the opportunity to produce grain. We looked at it as, if I'm going to start my own business, what opportunity do I give up? What's my next best choice? It's that $55,000 a year desk job that I hated, all right? But I'm giving up that opportunity. That's my next best choice. So we want to produce, as a country, where we have the lowest opportunity cost. Now let's look at some examples. So world output is maximized when countries specialize in producing and trading, where they have a comparative advantage. Now, I mentioned earlier, comparative advantage and absolute advantage are not exactly the same thing. We, as the United States economy, maybe we could produce a lot of things at a lower cost than any other country. We could produce grain, steel, iPhones at a lower cost, all three of those at a lower cost than any other country. But maybe, say, grains and steel, we could just produce at a slightly lower cost than all other countries, but iPhones, we could just kill it. We just produce so much lower than everyone else that that's what we should produce. So absolute advantage is not as relevant to our discussion of trade specialization. So let's look at an example where we are in a world with just the United States and Japan. And let's suppose we could produce two things. We could produce grain, or we could produce steel. And this is the United States. In a minute, we're going to look at Japan producing the same two things. We have the option of producing anywhere on this line. So we could produce 100 tons of grain, or we could produce 50 grains of steel, or we could produce some combination on this line. All right, so that's the starting point. Let's look at what Japan could do. Japan, they're not as big of an economy as we are, so they could produce 40 tons of grain and 0 tons of steel, or they could produce 40 tons of steel, 0 tons of grain, or some combination of the mix. So, let's look at opportunity costs. We go back to the United States. What is our opportunity cost of producing grain? Now keep in mind, this is a world where we only produce two things, and there's only the United States and Japan. So the only other thing we could produce is steel. So with that in mind, what is our opportunity cost of producing grain?
The potential price of producing steel.
Yes. All right. So to produce 1 ton of grain, what do we give up? The opportunity to produce.
Like maybe 3 or 4 tons of steel?
Other way around. So to produce
Am I reading it wrong?
So we produce 1 ton of grain.
Yeah.
We give up the opportunity. Well, let's look at it this way. To produce 100 tons of grain, we give up the opportunity to produce what?
Oh, no steel.
50 tons of steel. Yeah. So to produce 100 tons of grain, we are losing out on the opportunity to produce 50 tons of steel.
Any of the 50.
Yes, yes. Okay, so it was unclear. It was unclear the way the graph worked. Hey, all right, we'll just stay on that for a minute. Sorry if I didn't explain that clearly the first time. It's not a big deal. We can just take a breath. So our opportunity cost of producing, say, 50 tons of steel, what is that opportunity cost?
100 tons of grain.
100 tons of grain, yes. So by producing those 50 tons of steel, we are giving up the option of producing 100 tons of grain. All right, so let's go back to producing grain. What is our opportunity cost per ton of grain? For every extra ton of grain, what are we giving up? What is our opportunity cost? All right, you're on the right track with 3, but remember I said other way around? No, not negative. So we produce 100 tons of grain, we're giving up 50 tons of steel. So for every 1 ton of grain we produce, we're losing out on
500 pounds of steel.
Yes! Right, is a ton 1,000? A ton is 1,000 pounds?
Oh, sorry. 1,000. Yeah.
A ton is
A ton is 2,000 pounds.
Okay, so we're giving up
So,
half.
yeah.
A half. Yes.
1,000 pounds.
All right, I'll take it. So our opportunity cost is 1/2 ton of steel.
So it's the 100 divided by 50.
For every ton of grain, we produce that at an opportunity cost of 1/2 ton of steel.
So to figure that out, you take the steel. How would you figure it out?
Well, I just look before you even do the math. I just look at it. It's like, so 100 tons of grain. I'm missing out on 50 tons of steel. So for every 1 extra ton of grain, I'm trading off 1/2 ton of steel, because those 50 half tons would add up to 100 tons of grain. All right, let's look at steel. What's the opportunity cost? This may be easier because we don't have to do fractions. What's the opportunity cost of producing steel? Yes. The opportunity cost of producing steel is 2 tons of grain. All right, so we have a lower opportunity cost of producing grain and a higher opportunity cost of producing steel. All right, we'll just log that in your memory for a second. Let's look at Japan. This is easier. So what is Japan's opportunity cost for producing grain? For every 1 ton of grain, what are they giving up? 1 ton of steel. Yes, their opportunity cost of producing grain is 1 ton of steel. What's the opportunity cost of producing steel? 1 ton of grain.
So it's better to just look at the 2 numbers on the end. If you start looking in the middle, it's...
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even look in the middle myself. All right, so I'm glad you didn't see this slide, because you would have known all the answers. But opportunity cost of producing grain for the U.S. is 1/2 ton of steel. Right, that's low. Opportunity cost of producing steel, 2 tons of grain. That's high. Japan has opportunity cost of producing grain, 1 ton of steel. Opportunity cost of producing steel, 1 ton of grain. So we want to produce where we have the best comparative advantage, which is where we have the lowest opportunity cost. So of our 2 options, all right, what is the lowest opportunity cost? Or how do we do this? Wait a minute. Let me go back to comparative advantage. All right, we want to do the ability of the country to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another country. Okay, so we want to compare. We want our opportunity cost to be lower than the other countries. So, all right, how does our opportunity cost of producing grain compare to Japan? Our opportunity cost is 1/2. Japan's opportunity cost is 1. So we have a lower opportunity cost. And according to the instructions on slide 4, as you're advising Japan and the next president of the United States on what to produce, you'll say, we produce where we have the lower opportunity cost, so we should produce grain. We should not produce steel because we have a higher opportunity cost than Japan. Now, what should Japan produce?
Guess they could pick.
Steel.
They have the opportunity cost of grain or steel.
Yeah, so that's the thing that actually just confused me for a minute, which is why I flipped back to the slides. You don't compare Japan to itself, you compare Japan to the other countries.
Oh. Costs them less than it costs us to produce steel.
Yes, it costs them less than it costs us to produce steel. So Japan produces steel, we produce grain, everybody wins. So we add up the specialization. The United States produces grain, 100 tons. Japan produces 40 tons of steel. We get a total world output of 140. Any point in the middle, we don't know that because it's hard to read the calculations, as Lonnie pointed out, in the middle of that graph. But trust the textbook, the world output would be lower. The That make sense? All right, we've invested a little bit of time on this. Let's just
The country's really useless to decide, or it's too hard. There's too many.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it gets more complicated than this. But they say, or they might start with what can we produce better than anyone else? They say it costs us less than it costs you, so let's start producing that. And then at some point you say, yeah, it costs me less to produce steel than it costs to produce you, but if I produce iPhones, I gave that example earlier, I'm just killing it. I not only can do better than anyone else, but I can do so much better than anyone else that, all I have to do is give you one iPhone in exchange for a half ton of grain or something like that. Because I can produce it so much better, more for everybody. All right, so let's just, who wants to summarize this for me? What's the opportunity cost for the U.S. of producing, let's go back to this. Opportunity cost for the U.S. for producing grain.
Half a ton of steel.
Half a ton of steel. Opportunity cost for producing steel.
2 tons of grain.
2 tons of grain. All right, so already we know we have a lower opportunity cost for producing grain, so we might be more inclined to produce that. But do we jump and say, I want to produce grain, or do we need further analysis?
Further analysis.
Further analysis. What do we need to analyze?
The opportunity cost of the other country.
Opportunity cost of the other country. You can say, all right, I can do a good job producing steel, but compared to Japan, I'm just killing it. Or I can do a good job producing grain compared to what I can produce. But if you compare it to Japan, it's like, whoa, that just kills it. So that's what I want to produce and trade with Japan. So we've got 1/2. Here's our opportunity. 2 is here for steel. Japan has a 1-in-1 opportunity cost. We compare those, not between the U.S., but to the other country. And that's how we decide to produce steel, and Japan decides to produce grain. Yes.
We produce grain.
We produce grain. Japan produces steel. Excellent. All right. All right. So this is good, right? Free trade benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody gets more steel and more grain. Okay, so what do countries do? Do they just freely trade? Or is there some opposition to free trade?
No.
But
They have import taxes, tariffs.
tariffs, yeah. Why do they have those tariffs? Why did they do that? I mean, this is
I got to turn profit.
the.
So they tax it.
Okay, so the government wants to turn a profit.
We don't want
Takes out circulation.
We don't want to buy more imports than we are exporting. I mean the other way around.
Yeah. We don't want to buy more than we sell. Why not?
Because that brings down our GDP.
Brings down our GDP. We're living beyond our means when we do that. But, but there's the benefit of if we specialize and let other countries produce what they produce at a lower price, everybody wins, right? But there's some problems with that. The problems are, one, we might end up living beyond our means if we find your products too tempting. The other thing is, if we're representing the American economy, if we're, say, an elected politician doing that, then we want to represent the American economy. And we want to say, I want to protect your job. I'm more tempted to do that than I am to say, well, I want the whole benefit of free trade. Economists look at free trade and they say, everybody wins. Everyone benefits. But politicians say, all right, there's some issues with that. I want my citizens to win a little bit more than your citizens to win. So they impose various taxes, as Luke pointed out, embargoes, quotas. We'll discuss these briefly and discuss the arguments, pros and cons of using each of these. Dr. Williams.
Well, they're also talking about jobs because, for instance, if you're not producing steel, your steel plants close, and the people who work in the steel plants, they don't have a job.
Mm-hmm.
And so the unions are going to be pretty upset if you're saying that, okay, we're going to close the steel mills and we're going to buy all our steel from Japan.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah. So what do you notice more? If you save 5% on the things you buy, or if you lose your job?
right.
If you lose your job, you notice that more.
What about what happened with Cuba? Like, we weren't trading with Cuba.
Yeah. Let's discuss Cuba in a minute. So what's an embargo?
Oil embargo.
Means we refuse to trade with that country, and we had an embargo with Cuba, and that's changing. Is it changed yet?
Not quite. Yes.
Sorry, we're in the process of changing.
It's limited.
Okay, so it used to be total embargo. If you were smoking Cuban cigars, then you were cool. But
Well,
you
you
were
could actually bring those on the plane now.
Oh.
You could buy them, bring them back to the States, but retailers and commercial buyers, like a cigar store or a shop owner, can't buy them and bring them into the States.
okay.
You can't sell them for retail because technically at the federal level they haven't really.
Can
Open
you
up
buy
the
them
embargo.
online, or you can only buy them there?
No, you have to buy them there and then bring them back.
Private citizens can buy them there,
I mean,
but you
yeah.
can't buy a bunch there and then sell them. Still a partial embargo. So tariff. What's a tariff? Tax, as Luke mentioned. So if you're going to sell your iPhones or your Samsung phones, Samsung's a Japanese company. If you're going to sell your Samsung phones,
Wasn't it Korean?
Korean
Korean.
Korean phones, right? We're going to charge you 3% on any iPhone you sell, and that's in addition to all the sales taxes and whatnot that the consumers need to pay. And quotas is we will let a limited number of Samsung phones into our market. So, embargo, a law that requires countries from trading from each other. Tariff is a tax. Quota is a limit on the quantity of good that can be imported in a given time period. What are the arguments in favor of all of this? Well, Dr. Williams mentioned one, employment. Let's talk about three that your textbook mentions, or three more. Infant industry, national security, employment, and cheap foreign labor. So let's work through each of those. What's the pro to that argument? Why do people make that argument saying we should restrict free trade because of this reason? And what's the other side to that argument? So, infant industry. What's the argument there that politicians and U.S. workers might make, or any sort of domestic? If we were in Japan, what would Japanese workers argue about infant industry? Why we need to restrict trade when we have an infant industry?
Because you don't want that foreign competition.
Yeah,
With that infant
we don't want.
industry.
Okay. In particular, we don't want foreign competition at a sensitive time, right?
Right.
All right. You might say we're trying to develop our whatever industry, our chalkboard industry. We're just trying to get into this. We're trying to get more Americans working. We're trying to develop this. We can be competitive a few years from now, but we may not be able to be competitive now. So, Mr. Politician, we need your support in protecting our industry by putting a tariff on Canadian chalkboards or a quota or something like that. The con, the other side of this argument, is that it's hard to distinguish when has your industry really grown up. And when you get used to this protection, do you think you ever want to go swim in the deep end?
You want to keep the protection.
You're like, let's just keep things the way we are. And remember, this is an election year. So it becomes hard to remove that protection once you have it. All right, national security arguments. Has anyone heard this before? What's the argument here? Dr. Williams.
Well, actually, one of the things we try to do is to keep our technology with regard to weapons and the weapons we have and not have them spread around the world. Arms dealers often get crosswise with the government because they're trying to sell these arms surreptitiously.
Right. we don't want to be relying on a bunch of Russian arms dealers if things get dicey. So we might say we need to protect our domestic arms dealers and let that industry grow. And this doesn't necessarily need to be arms. It could be oil. We want to have oil in the event of something disastrous like a war happens. Various food, various things we might need in the time of war. The counter argument is the government already stockpiles everything they need in wartime. Out in Nevada, they've got warehouses full of whatever they need. We have military planners. I don't know if you read this section in your book, but a lot of times people will make an argument based on the War of 1812. I think that was the initial starting point to this argument. When in the War of 1812, the Americans were fighting the British, and guess who the primary trading partner with America was at the time? The British. Okay, so we get in a war with our primary trading partner. So that can be a problem. So this is an argument that gets thrown in there if people want more protection, even though it's not as relevant these days as it was in 1812.
But it is relevant with regard to weapons technology, though, because people are prosecuted for selling U.S. technology with regard to weapons to Russia and other foreign powers.
Yes. Well, okay, so that's like espionage, though, right?
Well, yeah, it's industrial espionage, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not so much an argument to protect an industry.
Well, it's only to protect the technology so we can produce the weapons we want to produce, and so someone else won't have that technology.
Yes, good point. Good point. So we want maybe a tariff or some sort of embargo on other technology so that our designers can be protected and have good, secure jobs and build things they need to build for our national security. All right, employment. All right, here's the argument. Imported goods replace sales of domestically produced goods that result in loss of jobs. So, if my steel plant closes down, I don't have a job. And if I'm not producing steel as effectively as another country is producing steel, then consumers would rather buy from the other country. So this is a disadvantage, or a pro of this argument, and a real practical disadvantage that we need to be conscious of. If we have free trade, then people can lose their jobs. What's the alternative side of that argument, though? So, one is that it ignores the higher price that consumers have to pay.
In which we would buy less, that could cause unemployment or less jobs because then they have to go out of business or stop making something.
Yes, I like where you're going with that. I like that. So, first of all, I need to pay more. So why should I pay more just so Lonnie can have an overpaid job when I could buy more from Luke, who's sitting in Bulgaria selling steel and producing it more effectively? Why should I have to pay more just so you can have a job that you're not as good at as, say, Luke? That's one argument. The other argument is what Crystal, I think, is bringing up. So not only will consumers lose out, but other companies within, say, the United States. If they could buy cheaper steel from Luke in Bulgaria, then their businesses could thrive, and they could employ more American workers. Right? So not only would the consumers benefit, but other businesses could make up that shortfall. Maybe Lonnie will lose her job, but maybe the businesses that get to buy that cheap steel from another country could create enough to offset that. So that's the argument economists make. Now the other thing that we haven't really talked about is if we start putting embargoes and tariffs on Bulgaria, what do you think Luke is going to do, assuming he's in Bulgaria? What's he going to do once we start putting tariffs on his stuff?
Ooh, put tariffs on yours.
He's going to put tariffs on our stuff. Right. You think that's going to hurt American employment? Yeah. So that's the argument against that. You may say we're going to lose our job, and that definitely hurts, but economists will say, well, let's think long term. And let's go back to finding a way to make this economy work in the best interest of everyone. Sure, there's going to be some transitioning as Lonnie has to learn to do a new job, but the economic theory suggests free trade is better. All right, make sense? All right, cheap labor. All right, this is similar to the employment argument. The argument with cheap labor is the U.S. cannot and should not compete with unfair lower wages in other countries. So other countries, they're able to produce this steel at, say, a lower rate because they pay their workers less. They don't have safety standards. They don't have consumer protection standards. Could we compete with that? Maybe. We could try to. Should we compete with that and participate in this race to the bottom with lower and lower wages, less regulations, less standards? So that's the argument. We should avoid that race, and we should put a tariff on the countries that are, have these cheap labor, unfair labor practices, yada yada. It's the starting point of the argument. What's the counter argument to that? You could just read that, and if it makes sense to you, verbalize it to the rest of the class. So, let me say, in many cases, this is absolutely true. There are other industries or other countries that can produce at a much lower wage rate because of different labor standards. And if we try to compete with them, we will lose business. We will lose jobs. They'll get the jobs. To paraphrase something Bill Clinton liked to say, muscle jobs go where muscle is cheap, and that is not here. So we would potentially end up losing jobs to markets that can produce at a cheaper labor cost. But the counter-argument, there's a couple counter-arguments. One, well, we should produce something else that we're better at. We should go back to school, and we should learn how to be efficient at producing something else. And the other argument, which we can use without even going back to school, is that the American worker may be more productive because of better education, because of better infrastructure in America, because of maybe those extra employment benefits and that extra security makes a better work environment, which makes that worker produce more. So even though different country may have lower wages per hour, maybe Bulgaria, just using Bulgaria for example, would pay $1 an hour to a worker, whereas the United States, Lonnie's company, would pay $10 an hour. But what if Lonnie's American workers have better education and are able to produce more in that hour? They might. They might be able to. It's not necessarily an apples-to-apples comparison. So an American worker with potentially more education, better infrastructure, better advantages, may be more efficient. So we may be able to just completely throw out this argument. Even though Luke is paying less per hour, the American worker could still compete by being more efficient. So we should not be screaming, they're only paying $1 an hour, we need a tariff or an embargo or a quota. That's the con argument to that.
This is between the U.S. and another country, but I'm thinking it's a little similar to when people hire illegals and pay them a low amount. And then you can argue that well, the U.S. workers could be doing something else. They probably are
Mm-hmm.
educated and speak the language better. Or I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that.
Yeah. I think that argument could definitely be made. Absolutely. So, yeah, and I think there would be two branches to that con. One would be, yes, sometimes that's the case, that the American worker who has, legal entitlement to work would be potentially more productive some of the time. There's another chunk of the time where you just couldn't compete. After we think of Bill Clinton, muscle jobs go where muscle is cheap, that is not here. So the American worker needs to retrain, go somewhere else where they can produce at a lower cost. All right, make sense? I feel like that got a little more complicated than it needed to be. All right, let's look at the average tariff rate over the years. 1930, 1935, we had a 20% tariff rate. So if we were importing stuff from Mexico, from Germany, Germany is a bad example around that time, Mexico, somewhere else, 20% tax. That's pretty significant. But political trends, whatever, have decreased the amount of tariffs. We charge down to about a 5% level. And we're gravitating about a 5%. So there is still some argument. We should protect industries a little bit. But we get the benefits. We get more benefits of free trade with a lower tariff. All right. I mentioned economists' view of protectionism. Economists generally reject protectionist arguments for the reasons we discussed. That if we look at the theory, it's better for everyone if we have free trade. But we have to understand the political reality. All right, it hurts if you lose your job, and there's going to be pressure for those protectionist arguments. All right. Countries will often negotiate free trade agreements because not only are those various protectionist mechanisms, we just went over cons to those protectionist methods, and we didn't really go over, just tangentially mentioned it, that if we use a tariff on someone else, then they're going to fight back with a free trade agreement. So countries will formulate free trade agreements. Perhaps the most well-known, been a little bit of discussion of this one lately, NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Does anyone remember or know what Donald Trump thinks about this agreement?
The worst trade deal ever?
Yeah, the worst trade deal written ever. So we're going to look at some data on NAFTA, and we're going to think about if we can evaluate it as the worst trade deal ever, what we think about the data that we see. All right, we're ready to move on to balance of payments, how trade is accounted for when we're importing, exporting. There's a bookkeeping system for that. Get a little fresh air. Have any of you heard of the current account and the capital account? All right, first time. Excellent. So the current account is the bookkeeping for actual trades, goods and services going back and forth between countries. Capital account is the money that is used to fund those trades, how the trade is paid for. The way to read this current account and capital account, think of the plus. If suppose we're in the American economy, the plus is money coming into the American economy. So both the current account and the capital account, money is coming into the U.S. economy in this example. So, exports. All right, exports, that's stuff we're sending to other people. So they're paying money for that. So plus 1.5 trillion. Imports, all right, that's stuff that other countries are selling to us, and we're paying for that. Negative 2.2 trillion. And then there's some service, trade balance, and then I guess there's some income, just other little odds and ends. Not exactly sure what that includes. So our current account balance is negative 400 billion. What does that mean? How do we interpret that, negative 400 billion? Yes, deficit. All right, what does that mean in practical terms, Crystal?
That we're spending more than we're making.
Yeah,
Living on
we're buying more than we're selling.
Yeah.
Okay, as a whole economy, as a country, we're buying more than we're selling. All right, well, we have funds to offset that. Now, this is the capital. This is money flowing to fund that current account. Now, it's the same thing. A plus means money coming in to the economy, and in this case, it's the American economy. So the capital inflow is plus 1 trillion. Now, it's plus. That does mean money coming in, but does that mean these are foreigners just saying, here, take this money? No, no, it's coming with conditions. What they're doing is they're using dollars to buy stuff, to buy stock in companies, to buy bond in companies, to buy U.S. Treasury securities, to buy real estate. And you'll hear politicians get all excited about this. You'll say, we're selling half our country to China. Like they literally own pieces of our country. And it's true. It's a small amount compared to our whole country, but this capital coming in, it's investment in real estate, investments in company, it's dollars that other countries have because they sold us stuff, and then they're spending it. Some of it they could just keep in a safe. Like they keep dollar bills in a safe in Shanghai. But a lot of it, they're spending somewhere. And they're spending dollars where dollars can be spent, which is typically here. So this inflow offsets the trade deficit, somewhere close to $400 billion. I guess 27 of it is being kept in safes around the world, and the current account and the capital account balance out. All right, so now you know current account, capital account. Fantastic. Current account, first section, balance of trade. Balance of trade is imports or exports minus imports. So if we have fewer exports, then we have a negative balance of trade. Balance of trade over the past 40 years. Hard to believe. Back in 1974, 1975, we were at a trade surplus. But a number of things, most commonly oil is cited as a main driver of a budget deficit. So if the cost of oil is high and we're buying lots of oil because we're heavily dependent on oil, then we're going to end up buying a lot more than we sell. So a lot of these shifts, you can look back and say, oh, that's when the price of oil spiked up. Right. Balance of trade throughout the years. Trade balance with selected countries. Remember I mentioned that China is not a huge trading partner with us, but the reason why there's so much focus on that is because they sell us so much more than we sell them. Germany a little bit. Mexico's in there, and we'll talk about Mexico when we talk about NAFTA. So, of course, Donald Trump likes to say that we're sending them, what is this, $50 billion a year? Yeah, we're sending them $50 billion a year. So they should take that money and build a wall. Okay. All right, we mentioned how the current account is financed with the capital account surplus. All right, that's the pluses. That means money coming in, but it's not just here, take this money. They're literally, foreigners are buying assets in the United States. Capital account. All right, we're on to exchange rate. All right, are we going too fast? All right, I feel like we're moving through this material quickly, but that's good. So, as we're trading with other countries, the exchange rate is, of course, very important. As we try to buy more and more stuff, or less and less stuff, that's going to affect the supply and demand of dollars trying to buy other things around the world. And as other countries try to buy stuff from us, their currency, the supply and demand is going to work there too. So, exchange rate is determined, like so many other things, supply and demand. Let's take a look at this graph. Supply and demand for US dollars. So we're going to stay on this graph for a while because this is the best way to visualize a number of the concepts I want to teach for the remainder of class. So in this exhibit, supply and demand for dollars, we've got the cost of dollars here. All right, so we have price, yen per dollar, the number of yen it costs to get $1. So the more yen it costs to get $1, the stronger the dollar is. So if $1 is worth 150 yen, that's a strong dollar. If $1 is only worth 75 yen, that's a weaker dollar. So as it costs more yen for $1, we say the dollar appreciates, the dollar increases in value. As it costs fewer yen to get $1, we say the dollar depreciates, weakens in value. All right, so we're good. Up is appreciation of the dollar, down is depreciation of the dollar. So let's look at demand for dollars of, say, Japanese citizens. So if the dollar is cheaper, it's weaker, the Japanese citizens have to give up fewer yen to get $1 and supposedly get the same number of products and services, then they will demand more dollars. If the dollar is more expensive, then they will demand fewer dollars. So this blue line is the demand Japanese citizens have for US dollars. Conversely, supply works in a similar fashion. If Americans can get a lot of yen for their dollar, then they're going to say, here, take my dollar, give me all those yen, and I get to buy lots of Japanese stuff. So the higher price of a dollar, the more US citizens are going to want to use those dollars to buy stuff. And the opposite is also true.
Where can you use another country's currency?
In the other country, you can say, I want to buy your stuff, and that's the way we'll frame this discussion. So if I'm a Japanese citizen and I want U.S. stuff, I need dollars for that. All right. So we're going to look at the factors that may change this supply and demand. And like I said, I want to stay on this slide for a while because conceptually, I don't want to throw a bunch of words out that are going to confuse us from this basic supply and demand principle. So things that could change a demand and supply of currency. We'll look at tastes and preferences, relative incomes, relative price levels, relative interest rates. And we can boil all four of these things down into how they affect supply and demand. And so let's just try to have just a basic common sense intuitive discussion about how these four things would affect exchange rates. And then let's make sure we know how to relate that to shifts in the supply and demand curve. Are you ready? All right, so let's look at taste and preferences. Suppose everyone wants to buy more Japanese stuff. Suppose these Americans, they say Japanese stuff is the rage. It's the cool thing right now. So Americans are going to supply more dollars at any particular price point. So if Japanese stuff becomes the rage, the supply of dollars will shift this way. What happens to equilibrium when the supply curve shifts this way? Goes down. All right, it's because we've got more US dollars in Japan floating around chasing the same number of goods, and the dollar weakens in value. And that would make sense. Japanese stuff is the rage, so the dollar becomes a little bit less powerful, and the yen becomes a little bit stronger. Similarly, If U.S. buyers say they don't want Japanese stuff, then the supply curve would shift to the left. And the dollar, what would happen to the value of the dollar? Increase, okay? Because now Japanese stuff is not as cool as American stuff. So we're going to spend those dollars in America. So the strength of the dollar increases. And the same thing from the point of view of Japanese citizens. So Japanese citizens say, I want more American stuff. I want those Ford SUVs. The demand for US dollars shifts to the right. At any particular price for a dollar, the demand shifts to the right because Japanese citizens want to buy more American stuff. They want more of those dollars. What happens to the price of the dollar? We've got a shift of the blue line this way. What? Increases. Yeah, of course. Japanese citizens want more U.S. stuff. Value of the dollar becomes stronger. Japanese citizens want less U.S. stuff. Blue line shifts to the left. The value of the dollar decreases. So, taste and preferences. We can look at it, supply and demand. All right, next one. Relative incomes. So I'd like to look at this one just in terms of supply of dollars. Suppose incomes in the United States go up, incomes in Japan stay the same. We now have more dollars in the same number of goods. So we now have Americans probably spending more. So what's going to happen to this red line? Shift to this way. What's going to happen to the value of the dollar?
No,
It's going to go down.
go down.
Yes, I saw your finger. Your finger was like, wasn't sure. Okay, so incomes in the United States go up relative to Japan. Value of the dollar goes down. So let's think about that a minute. Does that seem right? That's true. That happens. But does that make intuitive sense to us? I don't know, just because we have more money, should we be punished? Well, I would think about this in terms of the discussion we had last week with inflation. So if our prices, if our incomes, if everything is increasing, and Japan is being more responsible in maintaining a stable currency, then our currency is more plentiful and it's getting out of control. So that's why the value of US dollars are going to decrease. And that leads us right into the next point, relative price levels. So let's forget the inflation for a minute. We'll come back to that one. Let's just say everything goes on sale in Japan. Japanese, well, and not even on sale. Let's just say the Japanese are able to produce at a lower price level because of increases in efficiency. They're producing something they have a better opportunity cost at. They've realigned what they should be producing. Price level in Japan goes down. What's going to happen to this red line? Supply of US dollars. Do you think we're going to want to buy more stuff if the price is lower? Yeah. So the price is lower, so this red line shifts to the right. As we buy more stuff, there's more US dollars buying more Japanese goods. The value of the dollar, what happens to that? As the red line shifts to the right? Goes down. Yes. Yeah. So that's just price levels decrease. We want to buy more of that stuff. And that argument could be tied in with inflation. So Japan is doing a better job controlling inflation, and they're keeping their prices stable, where US prices are going higher, so we're more tempted to buy Japanese stuff. Supply of dollars shifts to the right. Value of the dollar goes down because they can control inflation, we can't. They can produce at a lower cost or sell at a lower cost than we can.
Everything that we're talking about, the demand for dollars is just staying the same.
So let's see. So price levels. So demand for dollars we could look at as well. Just didn't want to add that one. But so suppose all right, so the costs in Japan, costs in the United States have gone up relative to Japan. So inflation in the United States, Japan has remained stable. So we have more Americans buying Japanese stuff. What do Japanese, where do they want to buy? Japan or the U.S.? Yeah, the price in Japan is staying stable. Price in the U.S. is going up. So what do they, which way does this curve go? Left. It shifts. Decrease in demand of those U.S. dollars because the price of goods in the U.S. is increasing. So as this shifts left, the dollar depreciates, goes down in value. All right, so last one, interest rates. So suppose the United States has higher interest rates than Japan. Well, what happens in that case is the Japanese say, I like these dollars more. Because if you give me these dollars, I can invest dollars in higher interest rate accounts in U.S. banks. So higher interest rates in the U.S. would mean I'm going to demand more dollars. And we would look, I like to look at just the blue curve for this one. So higher interest rates, I'm going to demand more dollars. It's going to increase. Quantity of dollars is going to increase. It's going to shift to the right. The value of U.S. dollars are going to appreciate, increase in value. All right, what do you think of all that? All right, I'm going to stay on that for just a second. Maybe have you reiterate some of that back to me. But that's it. I feel like we just conquered the important parts of interest rates, or excuse me, exchange rates. So let's back up and just make sure we're feeling good on that. So this is supply and demand of dollars. All right, if this price, number of yen per dollar, goes up, we say the dollar is what? Appreciating, gaining value. If the number of yen per dollar goes down, we say the dollar is depreciating. All right, that is determined by supply and demand. And we'll say in this case, supply of U.S. dollars, how many dollars U.S. citizens are spending on stuff, and demand, how badly Japanese citizens want these dollars. Want the dollars because they might be able to invest them for higher interest rates or use them to buy stuff in the United States at lower prices, yada yada. So there are 4 ways that we looked at of how this equilibrium shifts, and they are very relevant to our understanding of trade. So let's just review those 4. Tastes and preferences is 1. How does that work?
There's bad and everyone wants to buy Japanese things.
Yes, yes.
Then there will be.
Let's look at this red supply curve of dollars. What happens to the red supply curve of dollars if everyone wants Japanese goods? It shifts one way or the other. So if Americans are buying more Japanese goods, is there a greater supply of dollars or a smaller supply of dollars?
Small.
And Americans are using American money. They're throwing more dollars at these Japanese goods because Japanese goods are the rage this month.
There's less supply in their pocket, but there's more supply in the Japanese.
Yeah, that's right. There's less supply in their pocket and more supply among the Japanese businesses. So supply increases. So Japanese products are the rage. Supply increases. The value of the dollar does what? Goes down. All right. opposite scenario. Andres, take that for us. Japanese products are out of vogue. Nobody wants them. What happens to the supply of dollars and the valuation of dollars?
It would be inverse, so, right?
Yep.
So the supply, if it's decreasing, the value of the dollar also decreases.
So the supply of dollars decreases. This red line shifts
So
shifts to the left. So what happens to the value?
The decrease.
And supply of dollars, this red curve shifts to the left. So what happens when this red curve shifts to the left?
The price of yen per dollar increases.
Yes. And this is the equilibrium. We said if the yen per dollar increases, that means a stronger dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So, Japanese products are no longer cool to buy. So, we have Americans spending less dollars on Japanese products. This curve shifts to the left. Price, value of dollar goes up. All right, and we can look at this the perspective of the Japanese. If they want to buy more American stuff, they're like, ooh, American stuff is cool. All right, what happens to their demand for dollars? It increases. It shifts to the right. And what happens to the valuation of the dollar?
Their dollar
Appreciates.
It appreciates, of course. So whoever has cooler stuff, the value of their currency goes up. So we can sum it up like that. Do you like that? Whoever has the in-demand stuff, the value of their currency goes up. Okay, what was the next thing? Relative incomes. Okay, can someone break that down for me? So suppose incomes in the United States go up, incomes in Japan stay the same. Let's look at that red supply line.
There's more dollars.
Yeah, it shifts to the right. What happens to the valuation of the dollar? Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. Relative price levels. What happens there? So the price levels in Japan go down. So, go ahead, Stephanie.
The supply lines go to the right.
Yep. So yeah, prices go down in Japan. So more Americans throwing more dollars at these Japanese goods. What happens to the valuation of the dollar?
The dollar will go down.
Yes. Fantastic. All right. So lower prices in Japan. More people want Japanese goods. Value of the dollar goes down. And then last was interest rates. Suppose interest rates in the United States, suppose the Fed wants higher interest rates, and interest rates are higher in the United States relative to Japan. For this one, I think it's easiest to look at the demand for dollars from the point of view of U.S. citizens. Who wants it? Who wants to break down interest rates for us?
There's more demand for dollars, so it's going to go to the right.
Yeah. So Japanese citizens want more dollars because they can take those dollars and put them in a higher interest earning accounts in U.S. banks. So higher interest rates means the price of the dollar increases. All right, we're good? Fantastic. So I'm going to skip through all this because you got it. Depreciation, appreciation. Actually, let's just do this graph really quick. So changes in yen per dollar exchange rate. So here we have yen per dollar on the vertical axis. So more yen per dollar means a stronger dollar. Less yen per dollar means a weaker dollar. So back in 1980, the dollar was valuable, I guess more valuable. But since 1980, the value of the dollar has depreciated all the way to 95, and then it kind of leveled off. So from 1985 to 1995, the dollar was depreciating. It was really strong, and now it's less strong. So what was happening during that time? You could, yes. Okay, it doesn't really tell me anything yet, because it could have been a recession in the United States, recession in Japan. How did that affect? So you can tell me two sets of things. One, you can just list those 4 things we went over and said, well, maybe one of those 4 things were happening, and tell me that. Or if you know something about what was actually happening during that time period, you can share that as well. So to make it easy, let's just point to one of those 4 things. What kind of things were happening as the dollar was losing value? Taste and preferences. What might have been going on there?
The Japanese was in and the U.S. was not in.
Yes, Japanese was vogue. The U.S. products, less vogue. Relative price levels.
Price levels were lower in Japan, so we're spending more money in Japan.
Price levels were decreasing in Japan. Relative incomes. You got this one, Luke. I can see it in your eye. Relative incomes. What was happening during this time period as dollar was losing value?
People were earning less income.
Where? United States or Japan?
United States.
All right, remember we said this one was like a little weird. Does it seem fair that because we're increasing our incomes, our value of our dollar decreases? So it might have been that incomes in the United States were going up and incomes in Japan were staying the same.
Can you explain why again, real quick? Why?
So if American citizens have more money, they're going to buy more stuff. So there's more supply of U.S. dollars. So it depreciates in value. And we said, all right, maybe this is not, maybe there's some basis that we can relate to last week, where maybe we had higher levels of inflation, and nobody like Lonnie came along and said the party's over, we need to get inflation under control. So the value of the dollar may have decreased for that reason. And then interest rates, maybe interest rates in Japan went up. I don't know if they did though. But relative, that may have been something that could have caused a depreciation in the dollar. All right, good. Let's move on from that. That's just kind of what we went over. You can read those slides if you forget what we talked about. Relative income, relative price levels, change in interest rates. Okay. So now we think about how this relates to trade. Let's talk about this for a minute. So, a strong dollar. Who benefits from a strong dollar? Yeah, if we have dollars and we buy stuff, and when you say we, consumers, right? U.S. consumers who have dollars get to buy more stuff with a stronger dollar. You get to stay in Hawaii, or not Hawaii, because Hawaii is American, but those little islands off Japan. You get to go to those resorts, stay a little bit longer, buy more stuff that Japan makes. Who doesn't benefit from a strong dollar?
The country you're trading with, because they have to pay more.
They have to pay more, yes. Is there someone else who might not benefit from a strong dollar? Maybe someone within our borders?
Our producers.
Our producers. So as we're off spending more money in Japan, buying more Japanese stuff with our strong dollar, we're spending less money on American stuff. So we're spending less money on American stuff, more money on Japanese stuff.
So then we depreciate by value.
Well, we might like to. Right? And some countries do that. China is actually accused of doing that. China is constantly being accused of trying to depreciate their currency so that foreign governments, foreign consumers will buy more of their stuff. So, let's back up. So let's start with this one at the bottom. A strong dollar means U.S. goods and services cost foreigners more and U.S. exports fall. So a strong dollar is good for consumers who want to buy stuff with it, but cost of foreigners. So foreigners are now, if we have a strong dollar, foreigners are going to be buying less of our stuff, and Americans are going to be buying more foreign stuff. So the producers may not like a strong dollar, because a strong dollar means Americans aren't buying their stuff and foreigners aren't buying their stuff. Conversely, a weak dollar, U.S. producers may like that, because that means more Japanese citizens are going to be buying their stuff because they get a better exchange rate, and U.S. citizens are going to be less tempted to buy Japanese stuff, so they're going to buy American stuff. So a weak dollar can benefit producers. Strong dollar can hurt producers, even though consumers benefit from a stronger dollar. So again, we get into a political discussion. Now, in the United States, we don't really try to manipulate our currency. But if we did, and like I mentioned, the Chinese are constantly accused of doing this, they would get into that sort of discussion. They would say, well, if we keep our currency lowly valued, depreciate the value, keep the value low, then that will increase imports.
How can they? With the interest rates? Or?
Yeah, how do they do that? They I think that the Bank of China does some weird calculation. I don't know, help us out, Dr. Williams.
Well, I think Bank of China does manipulate it. They do try to keep it weak. I'm not sure exactly how they do it. But I think we try to manipulate as well. For instance, we don't increase interest rates. And so we don't increase interest rates, and these people are not going to be investing in the U.S. And so, we're going to be able to avoid inflation, but there's a cost to us.
Right. Well, so we don't increase interest rates. So that means we have slightly higher inflation, and then our dollars become less attractive.
Right.
So that may be a consideration. Yeah, good point. So the Fed may consider not only how do we stave off recession, but also how do we benefit U.S. suppliers. Could go into that argument. All right. So let's sum that up in the next slide, I believe. As the dollar appreciates, gets stronger, that helps consumers who are holding dollars, but exports decrease because it's harder to sell stuff when the dollar is so strong, and imports increase because as the U.S. dollar is really strong, American citizens are going to say, I'm going to go out and buy stuff because my dollar is so strong, I'm going to buy it from somewhere else. Helps consumers, hurts businesses. As the dollar depreciates, the opposite happens. Right. All right, so I want to talk about this concept that we just went over, as dollar appreciates and dollar depreciates. And I also want to bring back a discussion of free trade. I promised you just a little bit of data on NAFTA. So let's take a look. I'm going to spend, maybe I'm going to give you a few minutes to analyze this before we start discussing it. Take a look at this graph, U.S. trade balance with Mexico. We've got from 1993 up until 2013, every other year. Wait a minute, a few years skipped there. All right, but basically just say 1993 to 2013. Got 20 years or so of data. We've got U.S. exports to Mexico. We've got U.S. imports from Mexico. We've got the exchange rate. And are we at a trade surplus or a trade deficit? Remember now, most recently, we're at a $50 billion trade deficit. This wasn't always the case. So just spend a couple minutes looking at this graph. How did the printout come? Are you able to see that on the printout? A little bit if you have glasses? Okay. So take a look and tell me if there's some insightful things you might want to say about this table.
Exports are greater than imports.
Yeah, hold on one second. Just take a full, I'll give you another full minute and a half. A minute and a half is the standard for intelligent insight. silence, we're ready to start. So, what do we see as we look at this data and we think about how we might advise the next president on trade policy with Mexico? What insight can we glean? Andres?
I feel like the exchange rate was increasing,
Yes.
which
All right.
means that the peso was decreasing,
Peso was weakening. Yes.
and the U.S. dollar was stronger. So if you think about exports and imports, then we were exporting less and importing more.
Yes. So with our strong dollar, we were inclined to import more and export less. So how then does that play out? Do you see that? Tell me what you see. Do you see we exported less and imported more? But what about this? Like we exported a lot more though. We did. It went up in 1993. It was $52. Now we're exporting $256 billion.
But not relative to import.
Yeah. So there's the rub. So we increased our exports dramatically, but imports increased more dramatically. And as Andres points out, that could be partially due to the fact that the dollar got stronger. So stronger dollar benefits individual consumers, but hurts the U.S. economy as a whole if we look at producers. But on the other hand, though, I mean, look at this. We exported so much more than we did in 1993. And we import so much more than we did in 1993. Isn't there some of that discussion we had at the beginning of class where free trade is great because we get to sell them stuff that we produce at a lower opportunity cost and they get to sell stuff they produce at a lower opportunity cost? Is there some of that discussion we can have? Yeah, we could. Definitely we could look at individual companies, individual industries that are exporting billions more than they used to. And you could also make the argument that, all right, well, we're importing billions more than we used to, but that's stuff that Mexico is able to produce at a lower opportunity cost. So that's fine. That's good. Only problem is, though, if we keep doing this forever, remember that current account, capital account thing? So we've got $50 billion that we're spending. And remember, we had the capital account. We have $50 billion that's coming back to us. But is it just, is Mexico just giving us $50 billion saying, here, it's yours, take it? They're like, no, they're buying stocks, they're buying real estates, and real estate, land, whatever. And I mentioned politicians sometimes get excited about this by saying, look, this other country is buying all of our country, and before you know it, they're going to own our whole country. Now, this is tiny, though. I mean, I don't know, $50 billion a year. How many years would it take for Mexico to buy all of the United States? I don't know. 500 years?
It's a deficit. It adds up. You're still incurring a loss each year.
Yeah, so the Mexicans are buying $50 billion more. But right now, it's so tiny. And where it also, Luke, comes into play is if the government is running a deficit. If this is a result of the U.S. government spending more money than they have. So not only are Mexican citizens sort of buying parts of the U.S., but we're adding up extra debt from a government standpoint.
But even though we're in that much debt, our dollar is still valuable.
Yeah.
More valuable than before.
Yeah. What do you think about that? So why might it be more valuable? Based on
It's more
preferences?
faith in the dollar. But I think what's happening is, yes, we're selling more to Mexico, or buying more from Mexico, but the Mexicans are investing in the U.S. The problem is if Mexico was not investing in the U.S., then we really have trouble with the capital account matching the current account on that. And so because of the value of the dollar worldwide, they are investing in the U.S. If that was different, then we would really have a substantial deficit.
Well, if they didn't want to invest in the U.S., like if they didn't want
to, right?
if they didn't want to, then they, I guess they wouldn't sell us so much. How does that work? We wouldn't be able to. I don't know. I'm gonna get confused when I try to think about this. So if they didn't want to sell us stuff, or they didn't want those dollars, okay, yeah. So if they didn't want those dollars as much, then the dollar would depreciate. If they're like, you're going to throw dollars at me, I don't care about those dollars.
It's like Carlos Slim buying the New York Times. I mean, that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. That's what they're doing with that $50 billion. Yes. Okay. So, believe it or not, in 1993, we actually had a trade surplus with Mexico. $4 billion. And we like surplus. We like surplus more than we like deficit because there's a problem with that. But on the other hand, I mean, if it's just, it's just a small surplus and we have such big scale, there's economic validity there. We can say, all right, at least we're benefiting from the everyone producing more and everyone selling more type of thing. Any other thoughts on this graph? All right. I felt like I was holding you in suspense for just a minute because I really don't have anything else to say. Next week we will review, try to sum all this up, and get you ready for the final, which will be 2 weeks from tonight. Look forward to seeing you all next week.